Welcome to Alive to Thrive. We are not merely on this earth just to survive, we are alive to thrive. I'm your host, Mitchell Murphy. You're listening to KNSJ 89.1 FM. Our guest today is Mitchelle Woodson, the Executive Director of Think Dignity. Would you like to introduce yourself, Mitchelle?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Mitchelle Woodson. I'm the Executive Director and the Managing Attorney of Think Dignity. We are a local homeless advocacy agency here in San Diego.
Wonderful. And we did preview on you on a show with Talk of the Town, and I just think so much of your organization because of the different areas that you're helping the homeless, that you are creating lockers for the homeless to be able to store things in so that they can go to job interviews. You've also created showers so that they can take showers before they go to job interviews. You mentioned right before we started the show that you're working on some other advocacy efforts. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yes, of course. So when I talk about Think Dignity, I intentionally say that we are a homeless advocacy agency because that's what sets us apart from other service providers, right? So while we provide direct services to folks experiencing homelessness, we also do some advocacy and organizing work to ensure that we are working towards systemic change to find long-term effective solutions to addressing our homelessness crisis here in San Diego. So right now we have three main areas of focus in our advocacy. One is ensuring that housing is a human right. The second is access to basic sanitation. And the third is decriminalization of poverty, right? What we found is if you look throughout the nation, for cities that have successfully addressed their homelessness crisis and drastically reduced their homelessness numbers, they've done two things. They've adopted the housing first model and they've decriminalized poverty, right? Because decriminalization only further perpetuates the cycle of poverty. The other thing that we're working very closely with is access to basic sanitation. I think we've seen how public health can be directly impacted when people don't have access to sanitation. We've seen that during the pandemic for sure, right? But prior to the pandemic, San Diego had a hepatitis A outbreak. And during the pandemic, just recently, we had a Shigella outbreak. All of these outbreaks and public health crises are directly related to lack of access to basic sanitation. And so one of the things, it was actually one of the very first advocacy campaigns I think Dignity took part in when we first became an agency, was advocating for 24-hour restrooms in downtown San Diego. And here we are 15 years later, still advocating for the same things, right? And so we partner very closely with the Invest in San Diego Families Coalition, with Planned Parenthood, and with San Diego State University. So in this advocacy effort. So San Diego State University has actually helped us to conduct some research on the restrooms that are available in throughout the county and the lack thereof, right? And so we're utilizing this data and this research to help to support our ask for more access to public restrooms. And so short-term asks like ensuring that the current infrastructure that's in place, that we utilize that and make sure that the restrooms that are currently available are open and accessible, that they are fully stocked with the appropriate toiletries, right? That they are sanitary to use. And then our long-term asks involve more permanent solutions, right? So more permanent bathrooms installed, not just porta potties, right? Because we know those are very costly and they don't directly address the needs, right? And so when we talk about having access to basic sanitation, this not only impacts people experiencing homelessness, although they are the ones that are most disproportionately impacted, right? But this helps to support the rest of our community as well. So folks that drive for a living, oftentimes they talk about not having enough access to restrooms, right? Nowhere to use the restroom. Families who they find it difficult to find a restroom for their children to use. Tourists that come in, right, have difficulty finding restrooms to use. And so we've been advocating for this along with the coalition of partners that we have. We actually have a dedicated website that I can share with you afterwards, Mitch, if you'd be happy to post that. We have a dedicated website for our advocacy campaign, along with a letter of support to sign on to, and we'll be using that letter to help to advocate with our elected officials on supporting this need for the community.
That's fantastic. And I really like how you're working with different organizations to try and piece all these things together. What do you feel like has been the biggest obstacle? I know you said that it's been 15 years that you've been working to get something as simple as like basic sanitation and having restrooms for everyone to use. What do you feel like has been the biggest hurdle and why that's taken so long?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so I think it's that when we talk about access to basic sanitation, I think that's intrinsically tied to the issue of homelessness, right? And so people think that while it is true, the people that are disproportionately impacted by not having access to basic sanitation is the homeless community, that also affects the rest of our public health, right? So if this, as we've seen during the pandemic, it was imperative that we all work together to ensure that we weren't spreading the virus, right? That goes for any kind of public health crisis, right? It's important that we work together to ensure that we're protecting the health and safety of our entire communities. And so I think the issues of access to more public restrooms is just intrinsically tied to the issue of homelessness, and people are not seeing how this impacts the rest of our community. And in San Diego, we are the 5th largest homeless population in the nation. And I think what we found is that we've been doing things terribly wrong, right? And also I think that our communities are experiencing this kind of compassion fatigue, right? Because we've battled with the issue of our homelessness crisis for quite some time now, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better. I think a lot of people are just kind of numb to the issue of homelessness, right? Or don't think that we can find the right solutions, right? But we know that there are proven solutions, right, that have worked. And so I think a lot of the pushback has to do with kind of the narrative that's been shaped around people experiencing homelessness and the issue of homelessness and our housing crisis, right? And so because of that, right, because of kind of the negative connotations and the negative kind of implications of the issue of homelessness, I think it's kind of carried over to the issue of access to public restrooms because of how closely it's tied to the issue of homelessness. And so part of our challenge is in kind of reshaping that narrative, right? And better informing the community and the public about how this directly impacts their lives and their communities' lives.
Absolutely. Everything is tied together. And, it's amazing the homeless outreaches that I have done especially when I was in San Diego. I would go out and I would meet with these people, and it was so sad because it's just like you said, it's poverty, it's making poverty illegal. This woman that I met, she was like dead tired and she was just emotionally distraught. And she's like, well, I tried to sleep on the beach last night. They kicked me off the beach. I found a bathroom to sleep in. I got a ticket for sleeping in the bathroom. And now I have to go to court because I have this ticket. They've made it illegal to sleep. And so I kind of want to go into the work that Think Dignity does to help the homeless that are struggling with being able to pay, because it's just perpetuating the cycle. If they don't have money to find somewhere to sleep, and then they're getting tickets for sleeping where they're not supposed to, and they can't pay the court fines, it's just perpetuating the cycle of homelessness. Will you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, sure. If I can, I would love to share kind of a story of a client that I helped to represent, right? And how, as you mentioned, right, the cycle of poverty only perpetuates poverty, right? So I was representing a young woman, and she had been criminalized for exactly that, for sleeping on the sidewalk. She had 3 separate convictions, and I think people think that folks just get tickets for this. These are not just tickets; these are misdemeanors. So she had misdemeanors, 3 convictions for misdemeanors for exactly the same thing, right? For sleeping on the sidewalk. Each misdemeanor came with probation. So she was on 3 years of probation for each of her misdemeanors, right? part of a condition of her probation is that the city impose a stay away order. So a stay away order is very similar to like a restraining order, where a restraining order restricts you from being within a certain distance of a particular person. The stay away order restricts you from being within a certain distance of an area, right? So as part of a condition of her probation, she was required to stay away from the entirety of the downtown area, and specifically East Village. And if anyone in San Diego knows, the hub of homeless resources are located in downtown. So in fact, she got into shelter. She was 8 months pregnant at the time that I started representing her. She got into shelter, her son was born, but legally couldn't access the shelter because of her probation and the condition of her probation. So we represented her in court. We were successful in terminating 2 of her probations early and removing the stay away order from her 3rd probation. But I can tell you that the city attorney went tooth and nail against me, challenging that, making arguments that this particular area in downtown was riddled with folks that were abusing substances when my particular client had no history of abusing substances and none of her convictions were tied to that, right? And so that shows you that there are these stereotypes that are perpetuated about people experiencing homelessness, right? And how counterproductive criminalization is, right? That you criminalize her for sleeping on the sidewalk, and when she could find shelter where she would no longer be sleeping on the sidewalk, you're preventing her access to it, right? And so this is what happens when we criminalize poverty, right? So now we've left somebody with a criminal record, and this criminal record only further prevents them from accessing the much needed resources they need to, get on their feet, right? So now she has she was actually a CNA, but couldn't renew her license because of the criminal record, right? People can't access subsidized housing. They can't access financial aid for school. They can't even access county benefits with these kinds of records, right? So all the resources that somebody would utilize to help to get on their feet, they're prevented from utilizing because of their criminal background, right? And, let's talk about what we consider criminal activity, right? And so a lot of the times I hear the narrative getting tossed around, well, they're a criminal, right? And it's easy to justify how you treat people if you deem them as a criminal, right? But the kinds of things folks here in San Diego are being criminalized for eating, sleeping, standing, sitting, right? This shouldn't be criminal activity. These are quality of life offenses, right? Just based on their lack of access to their appropriate resources. And so at Think Dignity, we are the only organization outside of the Public Defender's Office that directly represents folks experiencing homelessness in their criminal defense matters. And so we take on these cases and we challenge them, right? Because we know how this creates kind of more barriers for folks that are already under-resourced, right? And so we have a particular program, it's called the Homeless Youth Legal and Advocacy Project. The acronym is HILAP, where we directly represent homeless and at-risk youth in their criminal defense matters. But what's really unique about the program is not only do we represent them in their criminal case, we also pair them up with an advocate to address all of their other needs, right? Because we understand, especially being young, right? If your basic necessities aren't being met, your basic needs are not being met, right? You don't know where you're going to sleep. You don't know when your next meal is, right? You're not focused on the misdemeanor you receive for sleeping on the street, right? And so we want to make sure for that particular program, it's unique in that we're addressing all of those issues so that we can take a multi-disciplinary approach to addressing the needs of homeless and at-risk youth. And so we also participate in a lot of impact litigation where we directly challenge the constitutionality of a lot of these municipal ordinances that make it illegal for people to engage in life-sustaining activities, right? There's actually binding authority over California that finds that it is a violation of the 8th Amendment to the Constitution. So it's actually cruel and unusual punishment to criminalize people for sleeping on the street when there's literally no other alternative for them, right? And that's what's happening here in San Diego. We don't have enough shelter beds or housing for folks experiencing homelessness, yet we continue to enforce criminalization, which only perpetuates poverty and homelessness, the cycle of homelessness.
Absolutely. It's a broken system. It's the whole system of itself is broken and it doesn't support the people whatsoever. And like your points are so spot on. Like, not because of those criminal charges, she cannot fulfill her job. She cannot get the resources that are available because of a stay away order. You can only imagine being in that situation and being 8 months pregnant, not knowing where you're going to sleep, not being able to work, and then be given an order to stay away where you have access to sleep. That's just could be like devastating. It would feel like you're absolutely trapped.
Yeah. If I can share one more story about kind of the impacts that this has on people, right? You know, a lot of the times we hear these narratives being perpetuated about people experiencing homelessness, right? That they are, that they're lazy, or that they suffer from that they battle with substance abuse, or that they battle with mental illness. But we don't talk about the trauma that's inflicted on people because they're experiencing homelessness, right? So the amount of people that start exhibiting signs of mental illness because they're experiencing homelessness, the amount of people that start abusing substances because they're experiencing homelessness, right? That in fact, these issues are an effect of homelessness and not directly the cause, right? I was representing this young man who, again, kept getting criminalized for the same thing. He was criminalized for sleeping on the sidewalk by the beach, right? Over and over again. And it was the same officer every single time who, instead of offering him up services, would continue to ticket him. So I was representing him. And right before our court appearance, he actually was incarcerated for the very same thing again. I went to go pick him up before court so that I could take it. He was released right before our court appearance. I took him back to our office so that I could, so that he could freshen up. I could give him some snacks, some hygiene items. And he actually took a nap. And when I tried to wake him up from his nap so that we can head to court, he was so startled, he kind of like cocked his fist back, right, in shock. And when we were headed to court, he tells me, he apologizes for the way that he reacted when he woke up, but he said the past 3 times he had fallen asleep, he was woken up by a police officer who was trying to criminalize him for sleeping. We ended up going to court. We were successful in getting all of his cases dismissed. And I was asking him where I could drop him off. And at this time, it was raining in San Diego, something it hardly ever does. It was raining really badly in San Diego, so badly that our bridge shelters had flooded out. So nobody could stay in the bridge shelters that we had at the time. And so he told me just to drop him back off at the same spot by the beach. And I told him absolutely not, because that same officer is just going to continue to harass him. Right. So I took him back to the office and I called for 3 hours different organizations to try to get him housing. And there was no one that could take him in. I remember having to take a step out of the office so that he wouldn't see me. And I just started crying because I didn't know what to do. Right. That someone like me in this position, this is what I do for a living. And I couldn't find one place for him to be. Imagine, right, with all the connections I have, the resources that I have my hands on, the people that I have connections to, I couldn't find that. Now imagine somebody experiencing homelessness. Where could they go? What could they do? Right? And that I did everything I said I was supposed to do, right? I cleared all of his criminal convictions, and still that wasn't enough. Right? I was lucky enough that I have like a network of very incredible activists in the community who supported him in getting him a motel room for the night, because the very next day I could get him into a program. It was just something for that night that I needed him to be in. And that just exemplifies how difficult it is, right? How challenging it is for people that even work in this space, and to add to that, folks that are experiencing homelessness, to access safe shelter, safe housing.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to have you on the show. It's called Alive to Thrive for a reason. We're not here just to survive, but I have a firm belief that us as human beings that we're sent here to this earth and that we all have a purpose, and that we should have, like, we have basic human rights, and that we should be able to thrive, not just survive. But that's such an impactful story, and I can see why that would affect you so much emotionally, because you have this vast network of resources. And even if you, after doing everything that you did to drop his convictions, still were unable to find a place for him, what chance would all of these homeless people out there that don't have that support system and don't have that network, what hope is there for them? And so my question is, what steps are being taken to make sure that decriminalization of poverty is being put in place? Are they working on making it so it's not illegal to sleep on the street, or is there anything in the works of making it so it's not illegal to dwell in poverty?
Yeah. So we have been supportive of decriminalizing poverty, right? And a lot of the work that we do is, encouraging the powers that be to stop enforcement on a lot of these issues. And a lot of these, local ordinances and penal codes that make it illegal for people to participate in life-sustaining activities, right? But we're also part of a bigger coalition. So Think Dignity is part of the Coalition for Police Accountability and Transparency. The acronym is CPAT, and we're a member of CPAT, where we are advocating for decriminalization and really changes in the way that we police here in San Diego. So you can actually follow CPAT on social media, and you can follow the work that we're doing in that space. We currently have a policy, it's called Protect, that would reshape policing in San Diego. And a lot of this involves decriminalization, but also the way that it's impacting particular communities, right? And bias policing, right? There have been numerous reports that show that San Diego police departments are biased in the way that they police particular communities. So if you check out our social media handles, we also have a website that it really describes this particular ordinance that we're trying to get passed. It's called Protect. You can read more about that there and see how you can sign on up to our letter of support. Right now, we sent the ordinance is being supported by Councilmember Montgomery Stepp's office. And currently the ordinance is in legal review. And so we're, getting steps closer to really reforming the way that we're policing here in San Diego. But obviously there's still so much work to do. And so much of that work is both important, but couldn't be done without support of people like you and your networks, right? So if y'all want to check that out and see if there are different ways that you can support, see our action items. And we typically have, things in the community that people can come out and support. We always update that information on the social media handles and on our website.
That is fantastic. And I want to go back to, because I really wanted to really make the basis of the show is focusing on why the systems are broken, what steps we can take to fix it, and like really spreading the knowledge, because it's like you said at the beginning of the show, there's this stigma around homeless people, and they have this preconceived notion in their mind of who these homeless people are. And I've been to Skid Row. I've walked the streets and given out food and been in their tents. I've seen their circumstances, and a lot of these people are some of the kindest people I've ever met. Many of them are just in those circumstances due to things that were completely out of their control. But it is really educating the public and helping them be more aware that people aren't homeless. A lot of people look at them like, oh, they're lazy, they don't want to get a job, they're just panhandling just because they don't want to work. But really, there's some of these people were extremely successful, and that due to a series of events that were completely out of their control, they found themselves losing their home or what have you. I wanted to go back to the causes of mental illness caused by homelessness, or people becoming addicts after they become homeless, because living on the streets is extremely hard and difficult. And a lot of the people that I met with that were struggling alcoholics or that were struggling with substances, it was like they were caught in this broken cycle of they wake up in the morning, they're miserable, they're cold, they don't have anything, they've lost everything. And so they drink, and then after drinking all day, they drink just to like numb their situation, and then they wake up back in the same negative situation, and it's just this cycle, and then they get criminal charges on top of it. What do you think the best way of working within that cycle of helping people get the mental health they need after being homeless?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. So if I can take it a couple of steps back, right? And we're talking about kind of these stereotypes that are perpetuated about folks experiencing homelessness, right? So it's easy to remember the one man on the street corner experiencing homelessness who is also exhibiting signs of mental illness, right? You remember that person, right? It's easy to remember that, and you associate kind of that behavior to the entirety of the population, right? When there are so many folks you probably interact with every day and you just don't know they're experiencing homelessness, right? That 40% of our homeless population in San Diego are homeless or at-risk youth, so unaccompanied youth, right? You wouldn't even be able to tell, right? That we have families experiencing homelessness that are working, just don't make enough to make ends meet, right? And they're living in their vehicles with their entire family. These are the people that are kind of unseen, right? When we talk about the issue of homelessness. And so I think what's happened is that, and if you look throughout history in how we kind of oppress certain populations and certain groups of people, you find that what they do is they dehumanize that population. And by dehumanizing a population, it's easy to justify the way that you treat them because you've labeled them, like you mentioned, lazy, right? Not driven, not working, not contributing to society in a meaningful way. And once you do that to a population, people don't seem to care enough about how you treat them, right? They don't care that they're being criminalized because now you've labeled them as a criminal. But we don't talk about how these issues shouldn't even be criminal activity to begin with, right? Life-sustaining activities shouldn't be criminal activity. Like like sleeping is a bodily function that's necessary to live, right? We don't get criminalized for that. Folks experiencing homelessness do, right? Like imagine if you got criminalized every time you tried to sleep. And so what we need to do is kind of reshape what that narrative looks like, right? And that involves informing the public on the issue of homelessness, right? Really giving them data and statistics of what homelessness looks like and breaking that down, right? And then talking about the solutions, because we need to humanize the people that we're advocating for first, right? That these are human beings that have needs, right? And that we are not doing the best as our community to address those needs. And instead of utilizing law enforcement to be the first responders to these kinds of quality of life offenses, we should be utilizing organizations that work in this space, service providers, right? So for instance, if you see someone experiencing homelessness or exhibiting signs of mental illness or substance abuse on the street, why are we calling the police to address those issues when they are not equipped or trained to address these issues, right? They are not trained to handle someone who's having a mental health crisis. But we do have people that work specifically in that space that we should be calling to help get them access to the resources that they need, right? Police officers are not trained to work with people that are abusing substances, right? But there are service providers that are trained to work in this area, right? Police officers should not be the first responders to folks experiencing homelessness, right? If the issue is that they're sleeping on the sidewalk, why are we not connecting them to a service provider who can get them into a shelter bed or who can start the process of navigating them through the process of accessing permanent supportive housing, right? And so when we think about the issue of homelessness, it's closely related to the way in which we're policing these issues, right? And that in fact, we should pull police from being the first responders to these issues and instead utilize kind of this service-based model, right? This community model of utilizing the people that are trained and know how to deal with folks that are experiencing these issues, right? And so that we can directly connect them to the resources that they need. And that is a more effective solution, right? Because now they have the support, they have, and the access to the resources that directly meet their need instead of further criminalizing them. And as we mentioned in the show, right, that only perpetuates the cycle of poverty and doesn't address the underlying concern, right? And so we need to think about this. What are the underlying causes of homelessness, right? What are the root causes, right? I think oftentimes we're looking at it backwards, and we're not talking about how San Diego has the highest cost of living in our state, right? And one of the highest costs of living in our nation, yet our wages have remained stagnant, right? That there are a lot of people that are escaping interpersonal violence, and that's the cause of their homelessness, right? How are we connecting them to resources? So of course, there are people, as you mentioned, that are exhibiting mental illness, that have substance abuse. And why are we not connecting them to the appropriate resources, right? That's an illness. That's not something that should be criminalized. That's something that needs to be addressed by the proper avenues. And so when we look at how we need to address homelessness, we need to look at these root causes, and we need to look at how to better directly address those needs rather than further perpetuating this cycle of poverty and entrenching people in the criminal justice system, which continues to hold them in this cycle of poverty.
That was such the perfect answer, because it hit the nail right on the head of it. By calling the police officers and getting them involved, they're not equipped. They're not meant to do that. That's not what they're called to do. But because of the stigma and what people think of homeless, the people who are struggling with homelessness, that's their go-to response. And I think that educating them, it would be amazing if police officers were trained, and that was part of their training of, okay, look, this is, you are here to help the city. That is your job. It's not just to enforce laws and to give tickets. It's to actually be of service to your city. These are all the different network within the city that is to help, and programs to help the homeless. When you are a responder to a homeless situation, to, instead of writing them a ticket and taking them to jail, to take them to a homeless shelter, to actually look at them as someone that's in need and that needs help, and to take them to the appropriate place so that they can receive the help that they need. And overall, if people aren't able to get the basic foundation of sleep, food, shelter, how are they ever going to have a job and do anything higher and above that? One thing that we talked about on a previous show that we had you on was how the city's set up so that you have these large homeless camps, and they'll spend all this money cleaning up the homeless camps, but instead of just taking that money and putting it directly into creating housing. And I know that, and one thing I wanted to touch on is the outrageous pricing of housing in San Diego being a huge cause of why it's so hard for them to find housing so in the first place. So are there steps in place with the city of reappropriating that money to go from cleaning up these areas and actually investing that money into better facilities for the homeless?
It's a really good question. And that's something that we've been super supportive of, right? Is ensuring that we are not creating kind of Band-Aid solutions. And so what we've done here in San Diego is that we've been reactive to issues, right? Rather than being proactive in implementing long-term solutions. So if I can give you an example, during the Hep A outbreak back in 2017, this was prior to COVID, right? We had a hepatitis A outbreak. But before the outbreak, there was a grand jury report that warned the city that if we didn't increase access to basic sanitation, that we were on the verge of experiencing some kind of health outbreak, a public health crisis. And that's exactly what happened, right? And the city failed to do anything, right, before that. So then we have this Hep A outbreak, right? And that's closely related to people not having access to public restrooms. And instead of making sure that we were investing in long-term solutions, the city created kind of these bridge shelters. These bridge shelters, which only congregated folks under these under these tents that were located outdoors, right? And the idea was to connect them to resources and then get them into housing, but it failed miserably, right? And we invested so much money in that, right? For example, even after that, even after the Hepe outbreak, we spent so much money on sanitation during COVID, right? We spent so much money on sanitation afterwards, millions and millions of dollars, right? We continue to fund police departments to do this kind of work as well, right? We're talking about like utilizing police departments as direct outreach. If you talk to police officers, they don't want to be the first responders for these kinds of issues, right? Yet we continue to use them as the first responders, and we continue to pad their budgets, right? Here in San Diego, our sheriff's department's budget is almost $1 billion per year. That's outrageous. That is outrageous, right? We could be utilizing some of that funding into creating permanent supportive housing solutions, right? And so I think where we've been going wrong here in San Diego is we've been very short-sighted, right? So we see an issue and we address it immediately, which is important, right? But we address it immediately, but it's very short-sighted. So there are these Band-Aid fixes to a long-term problem, right? And so we need to really start. We've gotten recommendations from national experts on the issue of homelessness, on how we can better utilize service providers, what models we should be adopting, which have been successful throughout the nation, right? And how we can better allocate funding and using kind of that service model, right? Utilizing folks that are doing this work to help to transition people out of homelessness. And what has San Diego been doing, right? We've been shelving this data. We've been shelving this research. We've been doing the exact opposite of what's been recommended to us, right? And so I know, there are always efforts that the city and the county are trying to put forth to creating housing options, right? And I think what we need to recognize is there's no one size fits all solution, right? Every person experiencing homelessness is unique and their needs are also unique. So we need to invest in a variety of different kind of housing options. Like, of course, there's a need for like immediate shelters, right? But there's also a need for temporary housing. There's a need for long-term supportive housing, right? Permanent solutions. And I think that we really need to do a needs assessment of our population so that we can better and more directly address those needs, right? And so that we can allocate funding to the different kinds of housing options that we're going to need to address our housing crisis.
Have you ever heard of Charles Durrett by chance?
No, I have not.
You have not? Okay. Well, I'm going to get more into that in just a second. But I just want to remind our listeners, you're listening to KNSJ 89.1 FM. This is Alive to Thrive. We're meeting with Mitchelle Woodson, the executive director from Think Dignity, and we're discussing the homelessness and people struggling with homelessness and best ways to help them. And so the reason why I bring up Charles Durrett is because you were talking about assessing different people's needs and different types of housing, having immediate housing. There's a group that I had on a previous show from Amicus that they provided short-term housing for homeless veteran families. And it was built on a church property where they built 4 cabins to house homeless just for short periods of time. And Charles Durrett, he's an architect that's world-renowned. He's been in Time magazine. He's won awards in Europe for his architecture, but he creates these co-housing communities that have between 55 to 75 houses, but the way that they're built is to be as sustainable as possible. And the way that the whole community is built is to use as little resources as possible, but to be able to help as many people as possible. And so part of my goal is to network and to work with all the different shows that I've done, all the different people that I've met with, and try to tie everyone together to try to make long lasting change. And so I will have to put you in touch with him, because I think that he's he wants to help. He believes that co-housing is the solution to homelessness and to be able to create these different communities for long-term housing. But that's why I bring that up. To go back to the current issues that are happening with the city of San Diego directly. So we want to create the different types of housing and the different needs to assess it right now. And you mentioned that they had spent all this money and all this funding for these short-term bridge housing and things. Will you describe the bridge housing? What was that like that they spent all this money on and it failed?
Yeah, so there were three kind of mega tents that they set up in different locations, very close to downtown though. So there are these huge mega tents, and they put, you know, a bunch of kind of like, it's like a bunk bed setup, right? So folks could be immediately under shelter. And then they utilize service providers in the shelter, in the tents, to connect them to the resources that they need. But the reason I said it failed is because after the funding ran out for these mega tents, everybody ended up back on the streets. There was no access to permanent solutions after that. And so that's what I mean about the city is very reactive to the issues, right? So they were reactive to that instead of being proactive and ensuring that perhaps maybe, you know, funding long-term supportive housing would take longer, but it would directly address the issue. It would be more effective, right? Than spending millions of dollars on these Band-Aid fixes that only address the issue immediately and then don't have any long-term effects.
Yes, absolutely. Are there programs that are in place where if someone wants to get into short-term housing where where they're given the tools that they need, say if someone's struggling with an addiction, right? If they get into housing, they have short-term housing or sober living where they help them get a job and then eventually graduate from that into more long-term housing. I'm sure the answer is yes, but I want our listeners to like have a better understanding if those programs exist.
So here's my answer to that. Yes, there are programs that address those needs. The issue with it is that San Diego is not utilizing the housing first model. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the housing first model. The housing first model says that we need to. The housing first model says that we need to house people first so that we can stabilize them. And then we connect them to the resources that they need. For instance, if they battle with substance abuse, right? If they battle with mental illness, right? We connect them after we've stabilized their housing, right? Whereas here in San Diego, what we do is we require people to meet these requirements and then get them into housing. So what I've heard, right, and what I've experienced is that a lot of the times people don't meet the requirements to get into the programs to get into housing. For instance, I've heard folks tell me that like if you have a mental illness, you could get into this housing program, but you have to have a severe mental illness. So they have a mental illness, just not severe enough to get into this program, right? That shouldn't be the way that we're connecting people to resources. We shouldn't be creating barriers and requirements for a getting into housing, right? And so while we do have programs that directly meet those kinds of needs, right, that address mental illness, substance abuse, folks that are victims of interpersonal violence, right? Those issues shouldn't be a requirement to get housing, right? And so that's the kind of caveat to that answer, right? Is that we need to be ensuring that we're stabilizing people first and then connecting them to those appropriate resources.
Yeah, that makes so much more sense because, and you can see now why so many people fall through the cracks, because if you don't have a mental illness or you're not struggling from addiction or you haven't gone through domestic abuse, you're just dealing with homelessness because of some other outside circumstance. And then you start getting ticketed. Why there's so many people who fall through the cracks and that end up being addicts or alcoholics or end up, being on the streets and end up in these negative situations. but they can't get the help that they need. But that's so backwards that they have to be, if you're not housed first and you don't have the basic necessities to be able to sleep, eat, and function, that if you don't have that first, it seems like the whole system's broken. It's backwards.
Yeah. And, I think that goes over people's heads, right? How important that kind of stability is, right? I mean, have you tried to function at work while you were tired or hungry, right? And how people get irritable, people forget things, people can't function, right? That's what we're expecting about people experiencing homelessness, right? We're expecting them to function in society without having slept, without having ate, right? Without knowing where their next meal is going to come from, right? And then add to it kind of the stigma associated with homelessness, right? Not having access to basic sanitation, having to carry all of your belongings everywhere you go. So even if you did get an interview for a job, right? You haven't showered, you haven't slept, you haven't ate, and you have everything you own on your back, right? And I don't think people take into consideration how difficult that is, right? How challenging that is. And how that's an additional barrier for them in creating more positive pathways for themselves.
Absolutely. And that perfectly segues into, I have a short clip that I wanted to share about Think Dignity and what you guys are doing to help with being able to help the homeless and packing all their belongings. So I'm going to share my screen really quick and share that video.
Every day you have to be thankful for what you have, because you never know. You need to find the strength within you to keep going, right?
I wasn't always a caring person, but I guess from being through the same thing that they've been through, me and my wife went through the same thing. Being homeless, being on the street, being rejected, all these different issues we went through ourselves. So we can empathize with them. We can understand what they're going through.
Because out here, right, the streets doesn't discriminate. If you're 2 foot tall, 10 foot tall, it will destroy you. When the cold air goes in your bones, and it's, you're sore when you wake up in the morning. It's not easy living on the streets. It's hard.
People going through very difficult times.
When you're homeless, it's like the most humiliating thing in the world.
Sometimes it's really hard for people with lived experiences to really trust that someone actually cares.
Don't look at it like, oh, you bad. There's no hope for you. That's terrible.
I was going through a divorce, so I had nothing. I left everything. My house, my car, all that. So I basically came with what I was wearing.
I had to get 3 open heart surgeries, and I experienced domestic violence. Then when I got out of the hospital, I had nowhere to go.
There's never no hopeless situation. And you can't outgrow it without grace.
To have a storage system for them to be able to store this stuff for free is incredible.
Oh, without it, it'd be a nightmare. It's become kind of a safe haven for me and a lot of other homeless people trying to come up out of this situation.
It's like a ladder set down in the hole to help you climb out.
This is a blessing and a gift. It helped me so much. My God, I may not be here if I didn't have a place to keep my heart medication at night for my heart. So this place helps you to take from step A to step B to step C, because people shouldn't be homeless for years and years. You have to get out of it.
A lot of people do change. So little things like this are what makes it happen.
So I was on the street getting high and devastated and sleeping everywhere, and you're stuck in a cycle of destruction. And it goes on and on and on. There was a power greater than me, that was God, that just pulled me out of that. And that same power is blessing me, giving me the strength to encourage them and to share that same spirit with them. So when they come in, they can feel that. It's the atmosphere now.
This is a no-nonsense place with zero tolerance for abuse and for illicit and drug activity.
Everybody just knows when you walk into our center, they just kind of get it. You're just like, okay, this is somewhere that I really want to be, so maybe I should probably not start trouble.
These people don't just need storage. It's personal issues. They need healing. They need to be encouraged. There's a lot of need out here.
And when you see a place like this, it does a lot more than it looks.
We try to provide pride, dignity, emotions that people don't generally feel on the outside of the gates.
So it's very inspiring to see that they can bring out that full potential from within themselves. And that's exactly what our mission and values are.
I love seeing people coming out the showers happy. They transform themselves. They actually put some of their comments like, oh, I feel human again. I don't feel ashamed.
It helps your mood, helps you get into a better sense of self.
Yes, as you see in here, there's peace, it's serenity. It's more than a storage unit. I mean, I'm proud to say that's helped me out tremendously.
Having this definitely saved my life.
Did save my life, did help me. It's still helping me. Now I am moving on. Thank God because of this.
Everyone needs a chance. Everyone needs something.
Now I'm moving on, progressing, I have a place.
I wish we could do more. When you're doing good, you feel good.
I am so grateful for this little bit. You know, I am so grateful for it.
That's a good feeling.
That is so powerful. It nearly brings me to tears. Just being honest. Get me all choked up over here on my own show. So the fact that you're able to give them back their sense of dignity, and I love that the whole name of your organization, Think Dignity, because these people have had everything stripped away from them, even their dignity, because of the way that society looks down on them, and that they, you know, a lot of our own self-perspective and our beliefs in ourselves and what we feel like we're capable of comes, if we don't have that instilled in ourselves, comes from our peers, comes from society. And to feel like an outcast of society and to feel hopeless, I think hopelessness and homelessness go hand in hand. But to give someone back their sense of dignity, just hearing their testimonials and what power that brings is so powerful. And thank you. I want to personally thank you for the work that you're doing in the community and how fulfilling that it must be to play in the roles that you do and see the lives that you change.
Yeah, if I can add to that, you know, working in like the nonprofit space and working with vulnerable populations, it's challenging. You know, this work is hard, it's grinding, but it's so fulfilling, you know. And I think that I speak to people every day. I hear about their stories and their experiences, and that's what moves me, that's what motivates me, that's what keeps our organization going, right? Is hearing how we've impacted people's lives. And people ask me all the time about our successes and what success looks like, right? And success to me is measured in the way that people, as you mentioned, like feel that they've been shared dignity, right? And so people walk away, one of like the most impactful things I've heard somebody say walking away from our program is that we made them feel human again. How basic that is. Right? That folks experiencing homelessness don't feel human. They don't feel seen or heard or understood, but that the programs that we have and the way that we interact with the people that we serve, that it gives them that back. It gives them their dignity back, right? It shows them that we see them, that we hear them, that we feel them, that we understand them. And more importantly, that we are willing and that we will stand with them in this fight to ensure that they have access to the resources that they need, but also so that we can really change the system into a way that helps better support those needs in the long term. And so, you know, I look at success as a measure of people who now are self-sufficient, right? Who now feel human again, who now can better advocate for themselves or feel empowered to advocate for themselves. And that's the power in this work, is that we can instill that into people, that we can show people that they have exactly all the tools that they need, but we're here to support them in all the ways that they need us to.
Yes, absolutely. And, hopefully by doing shows like this, we can help spread awareness and take away that stigma and help people realize like there are people that were just normal people living their lives that ended up in these circumstances that were completely out of their control, and really take away that stigma that's become so attached with homelessness. And I think that awareness and educating the public is a big part of it. I think that the work that Think Dignity is doing in helping decriminalize poverty is huge, because it's starting to break break the cycles of homelessness. And a huge part of it, and I'm so grateful, thank you so much for coming on the show and really addressing the key parts of the system that are broken. And the fact that police officers should not be the ones that are responding to homeless issues. If someone sees someone who's homeless, look, instead of calling 911, look online and find a number to a homeless shelter, find a resource that's there, and you're going to get someone who's compassionate, who's empathetic, and who's loving, who chose that job because they want to go and greet and help uplift someone who's struggling with homelessness and take them in and give them the support, rather than having them hauled off in handcuffs and being given fines and stay away orders where they can't go get the help that they need. And thank you again. I'm just kind of like going through, this has been such a educational show for people who don't have an understanding of homelessness. But to kind of recap, addressing that there isn't a housing place order, and that the broken system and being able to get housing. And I think addressing all these issues and educating people is huge. And I want to thank you again for joining our program. We have about 5 minutes left of the show. I just wanted to give you a few minutes to share the direction that Think Dignity is heading, and to share any closing remarks that you may have.
Yeah. So we're continuing on our efforts to provide the much needed social services. So we do have our transitional storage center in downtown. We have our mobile operations, right? So that includes 3 programs: our Fresh Start showers, our street boutique, where we provide brand new undergarments and menstrual hygiene products, our street cafe, where we provide healthier, more nutritious food options, and then of course our legal department, where we directly represent folks in their criminal defense matters. And if it's not a case that we can take on, we can refer them to an organization that works specifically in that area of law. And then of course, you can follow us on all our social media handles to follow any action items we have on our advocacy campaigns, right? That housing is a human right, increasing access to basic sanitation, and decriminalizing poverty. You can check there. But I also want to add, so many people come and ask how they can support our work. And there are so many ways, right? There's not one right way to support our work. Some people have the luxury of donating their time and volunteering with us. And you can do that on our website. You can sign up to volunteer at any of our programs. Of course, we can always use donations, right? So we take in-kind and monetary donations, and that helps to support our work as well. But more importantly, it's things like this. It's having these kinds of candid conversations about the real issues of homelessness and how do we more effectively address those issues. It's these kinds of conversations that open up people's minds and their hearts to the solutions, right? And so I really want to thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share more about our work, to really go in depth on the root causes of homelessness and on what the solutions could look like and should look like. Because these conversations are the uncomfortable conversations we need to be having, right? Not on the just media platforms, but with our own families, with our loved ones, with the people, with our friends, right? A lot of the times people don't know so much of what's going on. And if we could have these honest conversations with the people closest to us, right, that could help to expand kind of the network of people that are supporting our work and supporting the long-term solutions to help us to get there.
Well, I'm so grateful that thank you so much for joining our show. And really, I hope that was my whole goal in starting this radio show, Alive to Thrive. And thank you all for listening to KNSJ 89.1 FM. Just to thank you one more time. I've dreamt of this for years. I'll be honest, Mitchelle. I have dreamt for years about wanting to create a program where we could have these tough conversations, where we really could get into issues and really delve in and focus on the key issue, focus on educating the public and what can we do to actually solve the issue. I feel like we get so wrapped up into focusing on the problem, we stop focusing so much on the solution. And at the same time, if we get so wrapped up on there is no solution, people just give up and they don't recognize that really there are solutions. And there are so many people out there that want to help get involved with your community. If you want to get involved, go to thinkdignity.org. There is a vast variety of ways that you can get involved. Volunteer your time, volunteer your money, do whatever you can, but really talk about it. Get out there and talk about it. Open up this conversation. Take this conversation that we just had and go have it with a friend. Go talk to someone else and open their minds so that they break the stigma about homelessness and spread the word and help go to the city council and find out ways to get involved with changing and the criminalization of homelessness and rally support. And if we all come together, I really do believe that we can make long-lasting change. So thank you again, Mitchelle. We have about, we're out of time, but thank you again. Do you have any finishing remarks that you'd like to make before we wrap up the show?
No, I think we've covered so much of it here. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you, Mitchelle, and thank you all again for joining us today for Alive to Thrive here on KNSJ 89.1 FM, and we'll see you next week.